one resource person in UK, it will be a good morning to you, and one resource person from New Zealand, it will be a good evening to you. So we are in different time zone. So that is why I welcome you all this afternoon. Most of us are from India, so it will be an afternoon for us. So we are indeed very much happy to be with you, especially our resource person, our prominent resource person who will be the speakers for this program. Thank you very much for accepting our humble invitation to share your expertise in your own field. So the theme for this webinar, as we have put up in the flyers, is the rereading the dynamics of Mizo literature, the past, present, and future. So the topic for the speakers are also highlighted in the flyers. We will be coming to them after that. So as we begin, I wish our speakers all the best. And I want to thank all the participants. We have a number of participants here this afternoon. We are very much thankful to them. In the meantime, what I would like to highlight is that since it is a program organized by the Mizo department, the program will be a bilingual program. In the meantime, there will be a Mizo language interfering, and then the English, it will come hand in hand. Okay, so that is why I would just like to say a few things in Mizo as well. Okay, please bear with us. Those who do not speak Mizo, we will come back to English section as well. Hey, in our webinar international program, kan dong ha lil may kan speaker do tak te mel kan huthaya kan lom ne maya he department Mizo department ina organize ne ma se international program ni tin university Mizoram University ina abwat sa yani awangin mani nambil tong ring tin kan ti theidon na wa kha khamin sha tia me ril result ta kan put po achurin ka sia kan soi masadu ani kan thupui te po hisab chonga kan da anga ya I khatia angkha kan namdang chian te le Mizo tong she thiam lo tan te khan anga ya wangin rereading the dynamics of Mizo literature kan tia kan speaker Mr. Zokian bilingual tak inaron ti anga Mizo tongina tamzok so ti mai thea kan India na khan Mizo tonga ti tura in buat saya wangin pimal somite yan tin UK lamatongin Dr. Marina yan in English in presentation ka ti anga ito ti line Mizo tong ka adu na hun mang thei bokanga. There will be questions and question hour in the after the presentation, both presentations so yan mo mi pakat present so both the presentation will be done, and after that there will be a questions. So participants, you can drop your questions anytime in the chat box. Okay, in the chat box. So the chat box is open for queries, your questions, or you can even send your feedbacks or good wishes, whatever. The activity of the participants will be done in the chat box. So I just want to make that clear. So as we begin, we will first have a keynote address, which will be the keynote address of this webinar, which will be given by our head of department, Professor Arvel Tanmoya, who is also the coordinator of this whole thing. So we will be hearing from him about the whole program. So may I invite Professor Arvel Tanmoya to give the keynote address.
Sorry, audio conflict hello.
Sorry. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. As we all know that our theme is rereading of the dynamic of Mizo literature, past, present, and future. I'll try to highlight in very brief. The genesis of Mizo literature was propounded by one of the first Mizo critics, Siam Kima. In the introduction of his book, Zalenaram, here I quote, so toward the end of the 19th century, the boldest of literature, Hebrew Bible, rich Mizoram, it is this that Savage and Lawrence, already adept in Greek and Roman literature, use as their base to formulate Mizo literature. Our literary form, therefore, have their roots in Greek and Roman literature. Close. Even if we accept this view of Siam Kima, it is to be noted that the Greek and Roman roots of Mizo literature trace the genesis of the present-day Mizo literature and not of the past. The dynamic of Mizo literature can thus be reread and analyzed from this viewpoint, how it has grown from the past to its present form, and what lays in store for it in the future. First of all, a scroll of hide, the beginning of Mizo literature. According to tradition, Mizo used to have a scroll of hide, as is evident from the following, I quote, "We Mizo used to have our own alphabet. Our forefather wrote it down on a scroll of hide and preserved it carefully. However, as a time passed by, they got negligent and used the scroll to cover their wooden mortars. One day they were out in the field. A hungry dog ate up the scroll. They were then left without any written alphabet, which later rendered them illiterate." Close. Based on James Scott's The Art of Not Being Governed, the losing of the scroll of hide of the alphabet was a thing born of necessity. It had they preserved their alphabet, thereby the written records of their past, their former master or king could reclaim them as their own even long after they had migrated to other places. They could always say, "As per your records, you are once under us. You will always, therefore, be our subject in no matter where you are." Though the present generation might never know the real reason behind the loss of the scroll, one thing is certain. Due to the loss of the scroll, thereby written record of anything, Mizo literature and criticism thereof see a late birth. There is not all. Due to the loss of the scroll, only written literature was considered literature per se, even among the educated circle of the past. Zhuge himself in his Lusai literature iterated thus, I quote, the oral literature we used to have were not literature per se because they were not put down in written form. Shyamkima too said, I quote, "One thing that we say we are in short of, namely literature, is due to the fact that we count only written literature as literature." Close. The great harm this brings about is aptly described by Shilal Siamtanga when he said, it is a crime against a nation. Secondly, Mizo literature that has its roots in Hebrew literature. The present Mizo literature year-wise begin from 1894 and spans, to speak in broad terms, till the end of the 20th century. Based on Shyamkima, one may also say that even Mizo culture is a borrowed garment of the European culture. Both have their roots in the Bible, and today's literature confirm this. The fact of the Mizo literature is traced to have its roots in Hebrew literature, or in other words, Christian literature, is not something to be deplored. There was no way one could find the scroll of hide again, so Hebrew literature gave a new alphabet to the Mizos. It was using this alphabet that the literature of the Mizo expands, be this in poetry, drama, story, or essays. There's no doubt that today's Mizo literature is built on alphabet given to them through Hebrew literature. However, As Liang Kaya observed, there is a serious things to consider here. I quote, "Our Christian hymns were composed by the early missionaries using words that the Mizo used colloquially. They didn't know that the Mizo even back then had vocabularies and syntax that they were used only for hymns and verses. As a result, the elder then thought that those vocabularies and syntax reserved for him and those traditional verses were too worldly. I think we now know this to be false." Close. Every poetry, therefore, has a preserved effect in the mind of those who are strict in literary criticism. This is necessitated the rise and importance of post-colonial study in Mizo literature. We shall, however, leave the topic of post-colonial studies for another day. What we must consider now and what is of importance here is Mizo literature has undergone tremendous change and growth over the years. This literature has not only garnered credibly, but has also produced genres that brings joys and tears, rich in their conceptions and expressions among its readers and listeners. This has been expressed by Jigwepa when he said that it was the heart and soul of the Mizo identity, and by Plato's, the heart and soul of everything is idea. The future of Mizo literature. The literature of Mizos and the likes of the 21st century literates have taken great turn. I think these have their times of the day. Their interests, their liking, their literary tastes are far remote from those of our time. However, this enriched Mizo literature, and this is a great thing. A question as intricate as it sounds always remain. Thus, change brings about development as from the past, or it is a change that just alters the way things have always been. Let, in accordance with the dialectic of a Hegelian dialectical method, conclude this discourse. The oral literature, as defined as it is, contain abundance of wit and wisdom. Christian literature sideline Mizo typical syntax and vocabularies. This has aroused intense critical analysis among the literates. Given the present standing, what could be the future of Mizo literature? It fuzzy at the most. However, it should be noted that there is a pleasant mixture of thesis and antithesis, which means there seems to evolve pleasant mixture of traditional and modernity in literature, be these written or oral, and it may be regarded as synthesis. And this is a welcome development which will lead this society to a new height. Thank you.
Thank you very much, our head of department and the coordinator, for your enlightening keynote address, which was about a short, brief history of the Mizo literature. Even though it's quite short, it's quite comprehensive as well. Here in the here today, at this moment, we see that our Vice Chancellor sir also have joined the program. So I would just like to invite him if he is ready, sir. Our respected Vice Chancellor, sir, Professor Simbasiva Rao. Sir, are you ready to give a short speech? He is here with us.
Yes, good afternoon.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here in this webinar. In fact, I want, instead of I speak, I want to listen because I'm not really well thorough with Mizo language pros and cons. But I just came to know Mizo language is a little bit difficult for learning, because I tried in my beginning of joining in this university. I could not completely understand what is going on in Mizo language. I tried with some kind of words to learn. There is one book called Learning Mizo Language in 30 Days. I took that book and I tried with some words. Well, I could pick up very few words to understand, like good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, and these are and wishing in the morning and also wishing in the next week, like that. These are the only few words I could learn, and I finally concluded myself I am not a fitting personality to understand Mizo language, because my language ability will be not that good. But I could understand Mizo language is a very unique language, and it is not that easy to learn like other languages in India. Even after 3-4 years of my stay in Mizoram, I'm not able to get. I'm very unfortunately mentioning this. I could not learn anything the language of Mizo, which is very important that I would have learned it, but I could not learn it. I'm really feeling sorry for that. But I could understand that this language has come into transformation in the year 1894 from the traditional, that is tribal people. The language has been transformed into little bit mixture of English words. This is what I was having only very uh, few information, very less information about this particular language. But always I try to tell my faculty members, Ruth and other people in Mizo department, that Mizo language has to be updated, like getting into Google search. Not updated means that's not a correct word I used. It should be uploaded to the Google link. That Mizo language and English translation should be provided for the people like us who are not knowing about Mizo language. They should have a translational uh, uh, dictionary at Google link, so that whenever we have some kind of difficulty in understanding Mizo language, it should have been tested in Google. What is that appropriate word for that particular one? I've been telling them since 4 years to work out this particular one. Unfortunately, any of our Mizo faculty and English faculty are not in a position to take up this assignment, which was very prestigious one. I was talking to them because which is not available in the whole world. This language, many languages, including many Indian languages, they have Mizo translation, and translation to English is available in Google link. But only this particular language, my knowledge, because I am working here, it is not available. And no one is taking very seriously about my request. Maybe I think even now, at least after arranging this particular webinar, everyone can get motivated. The faculty members of Mizo language can think about my proposal that Mizo English translation should be uploaded to Google, and that anyone who thinks about Mizo language, they should have been facilitated with this particular translational language into English. That will be very good for spreading the Mizo language to the whole country, and at least Northeast region. People should understand that our language should be propagated to many parts of the country, and even surrounding places. So then that is a pride of our language. So this is actually has to be taken into, there are many steps for taking into particular process that is to be taken up by the Mizo department. The Mizo department is just localizing themselves, that publishing some papers, what actually they learned, and they're doing something, some research which is available for them, and they are making it Mizo literature, publicizing only in Mizoram. That is not really an approach for a language lovers. A language lover should take up this particular process, that whole country should take up this language, because how we are learning Hindi, how we are learning local languages when we go to that place. People love to learn many languages. This language, how it is possible? It is only by propagating our language to the whole public and whole universe. So getting into universal recognition of our language, the first step towards this one is making translational information to the English. Then only it is possible that Mizo language can be propagated to other people, and people like me can also be facilitated. So this is only my impression about my proposals which are made to the Mizo department, and also what is my intention of Mizo language to be propagated and also brought into limelight. I've been thinking since 3.5 years, ever since I joined in this university, but I could not motivate my faculty. This is what actually I am. Maybe I am failed man in that particular aspect, but it is actually my intention. But I'm very happy that Malsami Jacob has joined today and accepted our invitation to give a webinar for our speakers. Many participants from different parts of the country also joined in this webinar. Those who are not natives of Mizo, they are also joined. So please utilize this opportunity, and I request bilingual language may be maintained, because many people like me, I'm also listening silently. So it should be facilitated for me to understand what speakers are speaking today. That should be known to me. If at all you are going to speak in Mizo language, immediately it may be facilitated for the outsiders. In immediate translation may be provided to them. That may be good for the people like me. So to understand about the importance of Mizo language, how the pros and cons and feature of the Mizo language. My goal and objective for Mizo language, it should be made as one of the national language. There are very few languages, like 23 languages recognized by national language. So in Northeast region, at least it should be made immediately. The Mizo department is not justifying their responsibilities in not making this language as at least Northeast region language. So this is very important task for the Mizo department of MJD main campus and also Pachunga campus, that it should be all the faculty, they can have a meeting, and they can have a, where there are about 10 faculty available in Mizoram University and Pachunga University campus. All of you can divide the workload and make a translation of Mizo language to English, and make it upload to the Google, and make it first step towards the universal language, national language. So this may be one of the good initiatives the senior professors and faculty members of Mizoram University Mizo department to take up and to do this with an immediate effect. So I may be correct or not in my approach, but whatever I had in my mind and whatever the feelings I had in my mind, I just expressed to all of you to think about this. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir. I know how much you are concerned about developing the Mizo language since you have joined. I know that. I am one of the faculty that you have been telling. I'm very sure of that. So your dream will come true someday. We are still working on that, but it's really technical and digitalizing.
That someday should be before I leave.
Okay, sir, please.
That someday you are telling that after I leave and after I die, it is not correct, no? When my dream should come, when before I leave the Mizoram University, or before I die from this earth, it should come.
Okay, so actually now also the department is proposing one language project. So if we get that, your vision, your dream will come true. So we have submitted the proposal.
You first take up this as a departmental, you make a departmental meeting, all faculty members of your department and Pachunga department, and make a workload division and make it a project on this. No?
Yes, sir, please, we will do that. We know that you are very much concerned for promoting the Mizo language. We are very happy with that. So thank you for your encouraging speech,
Thank
even
you.
though it's a short speech. Thank you very much. Please be with us throughout the meeting so you can hear more
I will
from
be
our
here. I will
speakers.
be listening. I will.
So we have two speakers. You have mentioned Dr. Malsomi, and we have Dr. Marina from Oxford University, Oxford, UK. So she is
Sorry,
also here.
I'm sorry. I did not see Madam Marina. So
Marina, Dr. Marina is also with
yes,
us.
yes.
So she will be
But,
speaking later. Okay,
it's a
sir.
nice meeting,
Thank you
and
very much.
I welcome both of you for joining us, and I thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And I will be listening to both of you silently, but I may not interact, but I will be listening.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Kan vi si hi to na say ang kanin Mizo language promote na ko nga yan mahi ala tak zeta abiru le ti tak zetin ke ni po min hauna kate ang VC kan nei kha kan lom tak zeta ni kan atum na le adu na te kan zui zo lo de lecture na mar su kan na ti yang so coming to the resource persons, firstly I will be introducing our first resource person, the Pimal Somi Jacob. Malsom Shiazwali Jacob. So I will be calling her. Before she speaks, I would just like to highlight a few of her biodata, a few notes about her. Malsomi Jacob is a bilingual poet, a writer, and occasional translator between Mizo language and English. She has published 9 books, and right now also 1 volume of Mizo poetry is ready to be published. It will be coming out soon. Her books, 9 books that she have published, are of different theme and topics. So 2 volumes of poetry and short story and children fictions, narrative nonfiction, and 1 novel. And this particular novel, if I'm not mistaken, I think that it's the first English novel written by a Mizo writer. So this Zorami, a redemption song, is now prescribed in 2 postgraduate students courses in 2 university campuses, and then it is widely studied by different researchers and scholars. And one of her poem also, which is in Mizo Palo Ro, is presently included in the Mizo undergraduate course here in Mizoram. So she has contributed lots of poems, stories, articles to different journals, and also she have edited 2 anthologies, and one of them is entitled Prose Writings for Northeast India, which was published by Sahitya Academy recently last year. So with regard to her profession, beside this writing, she was the head of department of English department here in Government Aizawl College, and after that she teach English literature again in Bangalore, and right now she have retired and she is residing in Bangalore. In the meantime, for the last 2 years she has been in New Zealand, where she is right now with some other personal work, and she is a freelance journalist, writer in different newspapers like the Statements, Northeast Page, the Assam Tribune, and so on. So we are indeed very grateful that we have such an eminent writer, a poet, who is with us to share her expertise today. Before I call her, let me just say a few things which I have said in English about Malsomi Jacob in Mizo. Mizo bilingual, so we have to say both in Mizo and English. Mo min daw siya tiya mula Mizo tong in toy te kan soile lo kung pi Malsomi Jacob hi Malsom siya Zoli Jacob ani aming punso Mizo tong le sap tong in cham la apwa china tin le kabu hi pakwa ati chwak to a le kabu te hi wam chi sang sang ani poetry pani atit aziak to short story kan ti te fiction non-fiction te le novel te po aziak to ani tin ama hi tiam na lama chuan MA English ani kami ani wang khan in English department a reita pana ezonna atanchi thok china so ta chuan in Government Aizawl College kun engemaw chen head of department te ni no in Bangalore lama te the college a zir tir na athok chun zoma chunga retire no chuan do na hian in New Zealand na mani na tul le til sang tul na awang in New Zealand a omria chuan Ama he hemi freelance writer kan tiang journalist journal papers sang sanga tele newspapers te khanga khanin a in hanga thuziak mi ani a thuziak thiam takani a kan zinga mi kwal lava so wa ton hetiang mi hoina kan nei te kan nom ema. So with that I would like to call upon our resource person Bimal Somchiak Zwali Jacob to take her time. Madam, please.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And it's wonderful to be here. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You are clear.
Okay. Yes. So Honorable Vice Chairman also is
sorry for that, Vice Chancellor.
Thank you. The Vice Chancellor is also here, and all of you, the faculty. Yeah, I'm a little nervous, but it's a real privilege to be here. I'm supposed to be talking on Mizo poetry. Actually, at first I thought since it's a Mizo department, maybe I should speak in pure Mizo, but I was informed that the Vice Chancellor and other faculty members are also going to be there. So I was told to speak 50-50, make it a real bilingual. Okay, our topic is titled Mizo Poetry, a look at its past, present, and future. If we are the topic which we have put in Mizo, if it were to be literally translated, it would be something like Mizo poetry, looking back and looking forward. Anyway, the idea is clear, I hope. Well, one of the earliest forms of literary expressions that we have in the Mizo language was song and folk tales. They existed long before we learned to read and write. So when Dr. R.L. Tanmoy was talking about the what was that pre-literate literature, actually I think it is very important to accept that the oral literature also is a form of literature, only that we did not write it. So in this case, Mizo has a very rich collection of literature in the form of, songs and myths and chants and all kinds of things. But the present form that we call poetry or poems, which is meant only for reading or reciting, is a latecomer. The other, long before that, we used to have songs, as I've said. So this form, the form of poem or poetry that we have now, came only after people became literate, naturally, and after we started writing. So this happened towards the end of the 19th century. We did have those victory chants after successful hunts and successful battles called Hlado and Bola, which but we'll not deal with those because it's a very complicated matter. So we'll just deal with the straightforward subject of poetry. Now, the word song in Mizo language is hla, whereas a poem is called hlashil or tsamla. These terms were coined not very long ago, maybe about 2 decades or so ago. Now, this talk, I'd like to divide into 4 sections, 4 short sections. One part will be olden times, and the second, early literate period. Third, the present day. And in the part 4, I'd like to suggest a few steps for moving forward. This last part will have to be chiefly in Mizo language, as the suggestions are quite specific to our Mizo poetry. Well, it's going to be quite simple and straightforward. Let's start with the old times, the pre-literate period, which is, we'll just have a quick look at a few verses of this period. The first Mizo composer known by name was a woman called Pipmoake. It's quite interesting that though the Mizo society is strongly patriarchal, there were a good number of women in literature, even in the olden days. The song, the form of song, at Pipmoake's time, in other words, in the early days of its form, it had 2-line verses. So Pipmoake's songs are also like that. And I'll just give a sample of some of the verses in Mizo with my rough translation. It's not easy to literally translate, but just a sort of a rendering. So one of the first songs that we know is Kangen te kwa konun nua maka tlaki famman kangil rualove, which in English should be something like, our Ngente village, the place of happy life, never will I forget until I die. Then another one, Lam antame Belian palang tu Huangzolaya Zangxial and Nirzove, which means many dancing, big pots sit like a fence, and in the courtyard wild oxen stand. Now, these verses give us a picture of the life in those days. The first one shows that people migrated and sometimes missed their old places. The second one is probably describing a social function. The description is quite visual. Tragically, Pipmoake was buried alive, allegedly for composing too many songs. The legend says the villagers were afraid the coming generations would have nothing more to compose. Then we'll jump to another woman composer, Lalteri, at a later period. She was a Silo chief's daughter who fell in love with a commoner of an inferior tribe. Her family cut off his head, pretty violent, and hung his head on a pole in front of the house. So Lalteri sang in protest. Sai lo ngur pui sui lung in mo lua e, kan sum tua la chadang chung lu hoi ten in tare. What fools you are, Silo rulers! You hang my beloved's handsome head in a courtyard. By this time, 3-line verses were in popular use, as we can see. So Lalteri mourned her lover with many songs, refusing to eat or to wear clothes. When her mother tried to persuade her to eat, she responded, Chun rol lavin ka fam lavang kanu, sui lung lengin sai lo ngur pui fam lo ol na e. I will not die for lack of food, mother, but of a broken heart, a Silo princess may die. Because of her reaction, the Silo chiefs held a meeting and passed a resolution that they should stop killing their daughters' lovers. Pretty brutal times, but some improvement, I should say. Then another songstress, Darpongi, is known for her protest against injustice. She and one of the village elders fought over a goat's kid. Though it was clear that she was in the right, the kid was given to the other person. She decided to leave the village and sang, Chimtang kaliamdone, Kwaza ching nun biatu tumting, laya antanlove. I'm moving away. The rulers have not cut the judgment wood in the middle. Then we come to Darpongi's last song that we know. Says, Tu mang voi hai ang tarna, Kema van nuai thangi tlang tin sel, kazai puan ang chul lavin. Though I, much disparaged, wither like the palm tree and grow old, my words will not fade away. Much earlier, even Pitmwaki had also sung Katak fam se, kazai fam lo se, Thankor milal chunga chuang ro se. Though I die, may my songs live on. May they ride on rulers in the West. So it's very interesting that these old time composers both thought about the value and the endurance of their songs. Okay, we'll come to the early period, the early literate period in section 2. So towards the end of the 19th century, 2 Christian missionaries from UK, J.H. Lauren and F.W. Savage, arrived. They camped in Aizawl, formulated the alphabets, and taught reading and writing. Later, they moved to Lunglei in the southern part of the state. This was a time of big changes in the literary scene. Along with the education, a lot of changes happened to our literature as well. So the writing of poems also started during this period, obviously introduced by the missionaries. Now, during this period, the transition period, there are several well-known names. I'll just bring out a few of them. Oithangpa, Shrova, and Lalmama. I'll just deal with these 3. Oithangpa was a prolific and highly popular poet who composed in the old tradition during the early part of the 1900s. He used the 3-line verse, which was a popular form, and dealt with sentimental subjects like the passing away of time and the old life. So one of his verses goes like this. Kan len lai ngil hiala di kan chai, hai ang tarle sakmel chultur oi thangpan, kadon call lung reng a oi thailo, which means we dally with love in days of youth. As we grow old, our beauties fade. Oi Thangpa cannot but grieve while musing on this. So he was part of the transition period. The missionaries had already taught us the new form of songs, translation of hymns and all that. But he kept the old form, the old language, the old subjects. Then next comes Shrova, who actually had an education, a college education in Kolkata, I think. So he belonged to the period of 1893 to 1956. And we can say that he bridged the old and the new. How he did was like this. He wrote poems and introduced a new theme while continuing to use the 3-line old form. Professor Siam Kima, late, dubbed him the father of Mizo poetry. His subjects were about family value, the life of an orphan, about trusting in God, and the like. One of his poems, which is very well known, goes like this. Shakespeare kwanu leng choi anti e kailo liama kwanu leng choi chun choi lo wal tlei lian hi. They call Shakespeare nature's child. I too am nature's foster child, reared without a human mother. So those are my rough translations, not very exact. Now, Shrova, besides his own compositions, he also translated poems and songs from English. Many of them are quite popular. Then we come to another big giant for our literature, Lalmama. He was from 1901 to 1959. He had a great contribution in terms of literature and also culture. He brought in several new elements into Mizo poetry in theme, style, and tone. Nature was one of his favorite subjects. Older Mizo songs also dealt with nature, but usually as a backdrop to other topics, often of personal feelings. But Lal Mama treated natural objects and phenomena as the main focus. His famous poem, Virtileng, Address to the Wind, is an example. He also started a new genre of writing in English verse form using meter and rhyme. Then since this time, proper poems other than songs have come into existence. So now we'll concentrate on poems and no more deal with songs. In part 3, we come to the present time. We'll just have a quick rush through it. Poems became very popular from the 1970s and is still flourishing. By around the year 2000, anthologies and personal collections in books had come out. Especially after 2010, poems are multiplying quite fast, which is very encouraging. Young poets are writing many different types, some borrowed from English forms such as sonnet and even the Japanese haiku. And they use meter and rhyme in a different way. Actually, meter and rhyme form, it's not a part of the original Mizo composition, but these young poets are trying them out using tone in the Mizo language in place of stress in English. Let me just explain this a little bit. We know that the English meter is made of stress and unstressed syllables alternating. So it depends on how you arrange this, these syllables that the sound is formed. But in Mizo, we don't have stress. On the other hand, we have tones in our language, higher tone, still higher tone, or we have low tones, a little low. So we have about 4 tones, I think. So these new young poets are managing to use this tones like stress is used in English to write. So it's quite, it takes quite a lot of skill, I should say. I haven't exactly tried it that much myself. And then the annual print anthology, which is brought out by Mizo Poetry Society, called Zai Kung Thar. They started bringing it out, I think, 4 years back. So it's an annual anthology that comes out. And also Thaler Tlifim, it's an online magazine, online poetry magazine, started just last year in December. So these are very good boosters for the growth of poetry. Then section 4, I call it the way forward, but I have a few suggestions. So these need to be specifically spoken in Mizo. So I'll switch over to Mizo language and then come back. So I have a few suggestions. These deal with several aspects of poetry. Just a sec. They deal with the subject, about the diction, form, style, and the use of other literary devices. So I'll just switch over to Mizo language now, and then I'll end with I'll come back to English. Ole Mizo klashil nu lam le malam thlir na kan ti top maya thlir dan soi tur chu atam viawa ma se kan in soi zim lo chuan angai na omlova ma se ni sin khan kan soi zok to na lalma ma hi ka soi belle du tlatani achan chu kan hla thu pui kal mang le hoi hera thil thar tam takaron laluta a hlut dan hi anasa ka sia ani po hi tin athupuyatan hiat khuarel lam hoi aphwangun hle entirnan virthileng ti te trâu hố kan siat lar ve tak tak te hi tlemin han en chik lok ta ila vir thleng chang ni na hian lo chik ve ula sui lung ruala nuam ve ang hian thing tin mountain nu chol jong nen sul zui tum calcium an soi di me nga re lo hian iliam ton lo sako le hlawem ni vir thleng khoya liam chimo o heta hian thli chema thing mau le nim na chitin reng an che suau zui ve tum ni om taka akal na lam hoya an thledwal dual mai hi atelang chianga thli la chuan ngak du lovin hlau nei atlan chen ni om takin atlan san buan mai boxi tin tui pui sen vung kham rang le avela vamur thok siau te min mu tira a mu nam em ani chuan he cham hlapu ma hian imagery kan ti chiar tu te mitha a mu war thein a ron chop chuaka tin a phua dang le bok to ho hi a thale em boka adang a thalo tin an lovin to ho te hian khopui o ridur ka chung khwa nim tual le bat noi min kan hlau ngai love khopui o ridur khuang ro vir thirial lo room thang ban khuang pui ridum khozo mong thing ro ther tlia ke suang lung pui lo lum ri room thli pui le ro pui lo thok van lama thil thleng le lama mishing le ran te che dan chiang takin min mu tira ari te min ngai thak tir boka athurem dan khopui o ridur ti a hian ridur ti lai hi wartakal chiar hi apengal ringot mai ni chuan a hla rik dan le a rem dan le a om dan zong hian a in mil a om zian ne na in mil ngal thlap mai ni tin lalma mana ati le pakhat chu sapla ruang rhyme hi aron mang masatu ne mai thei karin danin haudang leng ti hi phar der kan leng phar der tual kan len na sang thing ler haudang leng shai choi phun bung zar kan moi phun bung zara hual reu ti in leng kan oi an aron ti chuak da dap mai ni tin nu chungi ta pon oma ma se soi thuilu tok lo mai la nu chungi khan hla thu le hlalama atho lok emema hla sakmi le chamhla te aphwa ve bukan ni po hian no pang te tan trong kam mol taksi moi takin aziak thiam hle li par tiang reng te kha karil ruwa ala om reng kala soi chuak thei deuh tho no pan lai ami kha ti chuan Shrova lalma male nu chungi te hian hla phua tu nei le mizo hla shil ma shwai tu ni an kopa heng mi te huna tang hian hla shil kan nei vea chuwang chuan ni chena ka soyang khan hla lam tel nilovin hla shil bi khi lo chui don to ta ila tin thil pakhat ka han ze tel du mai chu hla phua tu pani khua rel chunga anrel ruput dan hi rem lovin karon zep du awang chu ngai to thamo min ka se deuh hleka oi thang pa hla khan tia chua pui lo par tlanga vai puan sen angin chengrang phirin chai ka duame chunga kulwa lo furo pangpar moi tak amu khan sawa ka pop ati chak thlat meya anuami van khama ve thung chuan tlaizong para khan duat takin tiana tia vulmoi i vullai reng a toilua tharin kumsula lo veile la o enga moitin thang dang zong po chul mai tura khwanun asiam le arun ti ta dai me ni chuan hemi an khwarel chungchanga an ngai dan in anglo in person dai mai hi ami malmi zia chungchang nge ni a hun azir chungchang te hi ngai to azui mai atan ole chen lina kan lo soidon to anga malam kalkong ti hi la shilama mason dan hian ziak mi te tan rot na ron siam ka ron du deu nuala inti angani inti huaisen ang reng devin tin ziak lo critic le literature lamzir mi te tan po atangkai thawanga midang zia sa te nan po chuan heng ka soi du te hi mitam jok du dan nen ain kal mai theya mi huat thu soi te po alo om rum ani ma se tul ka te ve tlat sia tin mi chen khat chuan hetia mason na lam soi hian sap ti dan en ton ti nan soi sel chin ma se en ton ringot ni lovin chongdanga ti dan tha kan mu te chu senglu tila kan thu le hla than nan apoi mo ve ni tin angai ringota kan kal ngor chuan ma kan son thei don lo chuan kan soi masak du deuh chu pakhat na chuan subject chung chang hi hla shil hi communication chi khat thil ti thei tak ania tu ma mu lo tura kan thukrut tlat du don ani lo chuan hla shil siam tu te ta na poimo ma saber pakhat chu eng chung chang nge kan ziang kan samhla ten eng thu nge an soya eng ngai to na nge a chiar tu te ne na kan hlan du tun lai samhla chuak mu thei te zinga subject chi sang atam viau ram le khuarel ran nung pangpar khotlang le nam man lai nun te ani hloma ma se heng zinga hian nun hlui le di ngai lung len hi ala tam deuh berani in ngai zon na lam hian mun alwa tam ma ani chuba ka lung len sir son ringot po hi duain kan war mimal nuna le kan ram nuna veitura tam te reng nen kan thupui thana hian idu tui le zwalang u ti hi karot du ani la shil ziak tu te hian in thiam na hlutak hi engatan ngein mandu ti hi zo na poimo takani adot le chuan apani na chuan diction chungchang hi tongkam man chungchang hi lo soi le lokela hla shil chuan a soi tum chiang taka soi mai adu tok lova thil tum danga nei tel moi na le hip na nein thu aphua du chu wangin tongkam satya adu tok lo tong man dan dang lam deuh le chung nung deuh azong chin hla thua tan tongkam pa ngai ni lo hla ruwa kan ti mai man hi a chei moi na pakhat chu ani chuan kan tonga hian hla tongkam bik siam sa kan nga hle a kan mang rim viau boka heng te hi thatna atam chungin thato lem lo man dak to ti mai la heng hi atam ve tho bokani hla thu man chung changai hian du dan ai nang lovin in pial na atam viau chen khatin hla ruwa hlui kan nei sa te chau hi man zelan du a ka ngai dan be thung chuan a hlui chu hlui hlon a poilo chu kan ngai hlut lo wanga ni lova malam pan nan jok hla ruwa thar cher chwa belte po angai ni tin apathum na chuan form chamhla pian mang hi heta po hian in nel na om deuh nual chen khatin kan hla pian mang om sa tlar khata lam inzat le chang bi thlia nei chau hi ken zelan du amai ro chu chamhla hi thuk nei sak atan ani lo awangin chu tul ka tilem lo aphua tu in aman du dan zalen taka aman athamai free verse ani emo prose poetry ani emo thiam le moi taka a che swakha apoi mo berni tin meter hi english alam nat lo ain kan tongri sang ri an man hian ati thiam le bokani tin apalina chuan style chungchang hi kan ziadan kal manga hian a seile ki koizonga zia ain kai toy thlit film le bengbuk hi zirila katile dewani chamhla ziak tu le chia tu te pon ni thawang chu tam tak hian dua deuh lung no kai tho chi ti nep ti hliam hi an du zong ala ni in alanga ma se hi an berlo cham dua bol phot vak ain achiar tu swang tu ana kai tho chok chawa zia hi angai nat om zogani lung hlut lang emo rang ka chaklom me hi an ti thiang hlema an ser that nuwa a hlut na le moi na dik tak alo chuak thin chu tiang deuh chuan la hril tha chu thlit fim kai toile beng muk ani apanga na tan chuan la hril man ruwa hi literary device ho hi mandan zirbel le zelila la hrila tan thu le la ziak mi te man ruwa ho hi entirnan tlemazong lo tar langve lokila hey hi tiang devices man hi literary devices kan man hi hlashil beng muk kati kha khamina dan pakhat po anive khata ama sabera chuan imagery ne chinga excuse me nichina kan han soizok angkhan mishing imagery mishing taksa hriat na om mita mu benga hriat rim hriat na tui hriat na le khoya hriat na te chom zonga chamhla zia hian ril ruwa hruai du ani nichina lalmama chamhla mu nom le benga hriat chungchang kan ron soi nual to kha ma se sense dang po a engage se ani mu theile thil hriat chungchanga lalmama bertli le tro ho kan en kha chuan ma se tlemin han du am shet ila chamhla chungchang a hian arik dan a sound shim hi han bel cha de le de hlek ka duwa hla hi sak chi thuk ne nia chamhlai ro chu sak chi ani lo wangin athu mal le rem khom nuwa arik danin athunun thui ni mi chen khatin chamhla faknan a floor tha ante mai thina adik tho rimam ri ullo chu chiara nuam te meu ma se a floor tha ringut kha atok lo ani a chamhla om zia le arik dan a in mil turani chuan entirnan heta hian sap tunga tanga ho te angai de hleka awang chu kan mizo hla atanga ban phak sample han ti so mai tur ka shet lo wangin in lo she thia manga amasa in tennisana poem chorik songami Ulysses atanga unlock lotus eaters atanga laki claim lo en lokela Ulysses ale a ho te chu chuan chumi lotus mutti chuak du deuh kha an ei nu chuan kalzel pe tolwin I ho ta hian imu ha chol tong uti an soina angkha tiadaron tiani there is sweet music here that softer falls than petals from blown roses on the grass or night dews on still waters between walls of a shadowy granite in a gleaming pass. Chuan arik dan kalmang ringot po hian chiar thiam takin an chiar pe chuan mia oimu tlatani tin ale lama William Blake zia the tiger tia thung chuan tiger burning bright in the forest of the night te chuan mut chwa chu nai lo ni teru kan har phok sha zokang tin chu baka thumal rik dan baka a in rem khom dan ari in thak thlam aridem hi apoi mo le a hi hen kong ro asule thei boka heta po hian keima phua karon mang ve lok menga chu po chu arem chang ve rewa wangin ka poem pakhat black riders a chuan riders in black astir in the dark, hooded and cloaked, their formless faces hid, mounting their horses noiselessly steal over a land. That's one rikadeu sakor tlan ri soy nan khan rikadeu tek tek kha karon mang ve ne ke po in. tin Coleridge Asia, the rhyme of the ancient mariner line pani. Alone, alone, all alone, alone on a wide, wide sea. Hanti hian. Tui pui zau zia le at chan chin a soi mishing mal ngoi ngoi zia kha atilang ve riau bokani. Chuan ri chung chang a hian soi tur tamma ma se I du tokri ila tu na tan chuan adot le a chuan imagery chung ve kan ni chen na kan la soi kha tekin na lampang ti mai la pathum hi karon la topanga simile metaphor le symbol te hemi te hi man war dan simile hi thil sang pani an in anai lai te khin ania ang yang ti te akeng tel rokunga hla o khovel puan ang achul tur hi ti te o shing nun par ang avul chin hi heng te hi simile chuan ya alang sa war mai kan mizo hla te hian kan mang war viau hei hi chu kan war lutuk ma mi o te ka ti deuh thina chang chuan naw ang nuar naw ang tap naw ang nui puan ang thar puan ang chul cha mang zal tiang bel hi atam mai tam tak phei hi chu man zui to lo chi ni hialin ka sia ka soi fo hei hi chu heng te ai a hian pakhata chuan metaphor hi war ta zokila metaphor chuan thil pani te khin si in an in anna ero tong kamina soi tel lo thung thil pakhat kha thil dangin athak thlengemo a me belan mo ani bere entirnan nichena kan soi o shing nun par ang vul thin hi ti kha par ang ti kha pai taila o shing nun vul thin hi ti taila shing nun kha pangpar nen kan te kin ti soi kher lovin pangparin kan thak thlengemo kan me belemo ania metaphor thatak ani mai ani kadam lai ni hi atlak ma zongin katan chu ma jing thin tia po hian dam lai ni kha metaphor aron mangani I didn't see what just came ole symbol a chuan thil om sa inge mo khat entirnan amang thung chumi walin ani na hlo chuang si lo entirnan I couldn't see the notice anyway. Chuan entirnan aron mang thuna entirnan chu cross chu pomin ka bon ta tang tia chuan iswan khen be na thing kokal kha angia langanin ani lowa entirnan amang to kani tin pakhatia kan soi le anga du tok don mayang eng set nge ka hun man dan ni ka shelo
Soi zo rõ mà mình cái hôn lên này là soi rõ
ole illusion hi soi le ta ila atangkai viau boka kan mang warem ka shetsi alwa ka man lai chan chin emo kan thu le la man lai chan chin emo mi ming thang emo ziak mi dang te thu ziak le thil dang dang atangin engemo an mang tel an soi tel china kan la nei kha khan khami ava elu da kha aron tilang tela kha khan abeng muk thina ni kan thu le la kha heta hian keima chamla tangin kan mang le mayanga min lo shekyam ula example dang cha ka mu mai nei lo awangin khoizu bur ke athun le thlifim chishi adan chu abozo atle liam lunglo tuya an pilzo heta hian lung lo tui aron mandan hi illusion ani veta a Mizo thon thu Mizo myth atanga lakin karon manga kha khan an tinge kan tiang recall kan nei kan te don nge ni kami thil soi a ui om zia an bo chian zia le a ui om zia kha aron thai lang le zual tura ka ngai ni ole irony hi lo soi le lo ke la chi sang sang an tamakan soi seng vek lowanga chi khata chuan kamla la ran thleng le thing an sedong le vanala lukhum a inzom tia hian inkal tak angalang re theina le tuarna thil ti theina le lalna nen a inzom tlat mai hi irony chi khatani tin achidang le chuan Shakespeare drama Hamlet a chuan Colonial san afapa liatesa zin chuak tur azila toy te thu soya fin thak zia soi zwa zwa chungin rei deuh thu soya kha thlir tu tan chon nui zat thak takania kha po kha irony chidang chon ni le a hetiang ti elang deuh landan le ni na in kalte thil soi le a omzia in person te hi thu le hla man rozinga mi la hrila po tangkai ve tak ani ole pakhat chia kan soi le anga hyperbole hi thuar te maila hi kan chem kal na zong tak ani mel viawin ka sha awang chu thu hi kan war thiam em ani hlalama hian kan mang warem ka che alowa ma se man war ta ila kan tangkai pui viau thei ka ringtlat kan thon thua long tlai mel that na chuan koi sari a en ani mual zawa ta chuan ama chawin ni khata mual za awat zawa tual te wanglaya an thil ti te po anamai lo hle ni hetiang thuar chung chuan chan hi sang aneya athena chuan fiam thu thona nui te za tan shim ania athena chuan khami a thil soi poimo zia tilang tu kha ani bokani iswan mi hausa van ramalu ai chuan sangong sei xiao bengalu a olzo ke ati te po om zia ngai tua thui tam tha thui ngai tua thui tham tak ani hetianga hyperbole man hi atlang puin angia langana la ka tan ni lo tin kan leng zem hla pakhata chuan thei chang se itan si ar lak ka hwa me ti oma thei chang se ti hi tel talo se itan si ar lak ka hwa me ti taringot se hyperbole chatakaniang ole ti chuan kan hla phua tu masa ten hla an lo man tang kai dan kan ena kan cham hla ti mason nana rotna kan siam nol ta boka chuan thang thar te hian Mizo tong thu le hla ron choi kang deuh ula kan te tak mewani chu kan soi thei chin mai sela claim in English in kan bel le lokange so we talked about some ways of improving our poetry as it exists now apart from a lot of things like in the subject matter I was saying even though we have a variety of subjects still somehow we are still a little too fond of sentimental topics like love between man and woman and feeling very nostalgic for old times and things of the sort. So instead of all this, if we concentrate more on important topics, because as it is, being a poet is quite a responsibility. It's quite a high responsibility. So poets should think of what they want to do with the talent, what messages they want to pass on. And in terms of diction, Mizo poetry has what we call poetic diction, which is used in all the old songs and usually resorted to. But nowadays, actually, the new generation is using a lot of simpler words, shedding those. But there is quite a few arguments. Sometimes some people who love the old style keep saying, "Oh, these are not worth calling poetry. These are not literature," and so on. But what I'd like to suggest is that what kind of diction is suitable for the kind of poems we write, that should be used, and we don't have to always resort to those old special poetic diction. And in fact, some of them are overused. They are kind of dead and stale. Those can even be shed without any loss. That's what I'm saying. And in terms of form, there are different types of forms, and in the old songs we usually have number of syllables, the same number of syllables in the lines, and same number of lines in each verse, and so on. We had to do like this because they were meant for singing. But in case of poems, since they are meant only for reading or reciting, that is not necessary, is what I'm saying. So it depends on the poet's taste and liking, and whether you write free verse, or you write metered verse, or you write even prose poetry, whichever comes, whichever suits your mood and your talent, it is fine. The only measuring yard is whether it's beautiful or not. And in terms of style, somehow since olden times we were very fond of kind of lengthening, frothing up the emotions kind of thing. But I'm suggesting that we should stick more to condensing, shortening, filtering, and so on. We should learn to make it shorter and more packed, like like gold, purified gold, or polished diamond. That is what we should attempt in a poetry. And then I suggested using the literary devices which are found in English, which we can use. Of course, many of them are being used as well, but we could pay a little more attention to those, like imagery and things like simile, metaphor, and symbol. And I said simile we do use a lot, maybe too much, but the others, metaphor and symbol, maybe we could stress a little more on them to tighten our poems and also to enrich it. And then allusion is another thing which we could use with to great advantage, and irony, the different types, and also hyperbole. In exaggeration, we are very good, actually. The Mizo tradition, we have a lot of funny stories, exaggerated. For example, there's a beautiful girl called Long Tai, whose beauty shone over 7 winding roads. So that's a kind of hyperbole we are capable of. And if these are to be used in poetry effectively, it could be quite interesting. So this is all that I can suggest right now. We had a quick look at the development of Mizo poetry, and then I made suggestions for future course. So I hope that the younger generation will keep improving our poetry, and like the a respected Vice Chancellor said, this would also be in improving our literature, is also part of improving the language. And I'd like to say again that Mizoram University is really, really fortunate to have a Vice Chancellor who is so zealous for Mizo language. And I really thank him from my heart. And so I'll close with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Bimal Somshat-Zwali. That was a very interesting and informative, thought-provoking lecture, especially for the non-Mizo participants. I see lots of them are here in the participants list, so they will be really, really getting a lot of information about Mizo poetry. And also you are tracing the whole Mizo poetry right from the beginning of Pimhuaki coming to the future. So in that short lecture, you have covered tracing the whole Mizo folk song to folk, the poetry to the present and the future. Thank you very much, Pishat-Zwali. Kan lom tak ni suggestions teka katia younger poets kan changthar poetry ziak tu te poets and mason na tu tam tak katia ang senior poet han kita mai la mo Mizo poetry bu te le lo boy puya lo tul pui be tak tak ina katia ni pe kha kan nok puin ka ringa voina hian zero light tam tak ma zero light te le UG lampang BA zero light upon oma kang khanin an lok pui donin ka siani. Thank you very much. Kan lom tak zed ni katia lecture would minun ka. So once again, thank you very much, and we will come back to you. So don't leave the group. The discussion will be there because questions and answer are being sent in the chat box. More so question le answer karon ton mol ula chat box hian Bimal so mi chan tu te heta pi marina ina huna manzo khan question kha an pani in an chang le don ani. So now we are coming to the second speaker. The next speaker, the numbering and 1 and 2 does not mean anything. Okay, just that we are putting the first speaker and the second speaker. We have another speaker who is Dr. Marina Ngursang Zeli Binera. She is from UK, and I would like to introduce her before she give her lecture. Dr. Marina is a research tutor in charge of MPhil stage at the Oxford Centre for Mission Studies, Oxford, UK. So presently, she is also a associate researcher at the Faculty of Theology at the University of Pretoria, South Africa. We are very fortunate that we have such an eminent researcher and scholar. So currently, she is also a member of a steering group of 6 members organizing a global study process with 17 study centers across the globe. So this steering group of committee, only 6 members who are taking care of more than 17 study centers is really not a small thing, as I can understand. So today, she is presently an editor of Transformation, an international journal of holistic mission studies. She has organized a number of important webinars and seminars, and also she has published a number of books and also written a number of research articles and papers in different journals. And also she was the member of Reformed Catholic Dialogue Team, 7-person member under the Theology of Communion Department of the World Communion of Reformed Churches between 2011 and 2016. So now, with this short biodata of Dr. Marina, I would like to welcome her to take her time. As we have said that through our communication, she will be presenting in English, if I'm not mistaken, but please feel free to speak in Mizo as well, since it's a bilingual program. chuan khatia ang khampi marinai kha toite Mizo tungin kan soile lok nga pi marinai hi ani hi UK lama o mani ve thunga I Oxford Center for Mission Studies tuna hian professor kan tiang zirtir tu kan tiang hian ni mayanga research tutor MPhil degree te le khatia ang in charge ka ani a to be back chuanin associate researcher te po ani boka faculty for theology at the University of Pretoria in South Africa lamate heng baka hian le khabu te engemol sa ta chwa to ama te po hianin khatia ang program tuna kan nei ang chi seminar pui tak tak te North East bial pui in charge te ni in khang te ka lo wai hot to tin chu baka chuan hei editor ni na te po aneya International Journal Holistic Mission Studies kan ti ate kate ang khan minamay lo tak ti ang nro wi tak Mizo nu wa ina hianin hetia ang present the turin kan zinga aron tela kan lom ema a presentation tura hi kan soilo ka chuan sap trong vek tura kan ngaya ama thu ni se sap trong the English le Mizo kha adu zok zok bang theya tuna hianin Dr. Marina Ikaning kan som na ni se, may I please call upon Dr. Marina to take her time.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the warm welcome, and I feel grateful and honored to be invited to do this presentation this morning, at least for me this morning. And I will be mainly speaking, my paper presentation is mainly in English, but then I will be also having a PowerPoint, which I hope will help you and enable you to get a better grasp of what I'm talking about. I have written my paper mainly in English because the audience that I have intended are not Mizos actually, but those people who are outsiders, I would mean like globally and also nationally, people who are not from Mizoram. And so in that sense, most of the things that I will be talking about would probably be familiar to you and you would be acquainted with most of the things that I am saying. But then what I am trying to say is, what I'm trying to do in my presentation is sort of create a perspective, a new perspective in how we look at our history. Can I do a PowerPoint? I would like to share my PowerPoint, so I would share my screen.
Yes, ma'am, please go ahead.
So as I said, this paper is a part of a larger project where I focus on the interaction among the Mizo people in a given time and place, which is today's Mizoram, beginning from 1850 to the early 21st century. The emergence of that space and what the interacting persons in that space and time set and are reported to have done is understood to be drawn from the discourses, the underlying features of which are accessible only in the written statements of the persons involved. According to Michel Foucault, discourse forms the subject matter about which social agents talked about, and their statements become meaningful only within the discourse. Those who move and express themselves in such a field create what in turn became the formative space for those who followed after them. Most writers agree that the Northeast region has been neglected in the studies on history as a region, as well as part of the national history of India. Malcolm Dongliana, in his Cultural History 2012, quotes approvingly Sajal Nak, a historian from the Northeast, who states that the history of the region has not been looked into as a part of the history of India. Nak said, such neglect prompted the historian of Northeast India to take up research on the area, but they failed to communicate them to the rest of India. And Malcolm Dongliana adds, as a result, Northeast continues to suffer from historiographical exclusion. But unless the stories of Northeast are integrated with the history of the rest of the country, a true national history can never be achieved. Close quote. So one needs to critically reflect on what is a true national history in times when a Hindu identity is deleted. It is declared to be the one and only true Indian identity. Such a hegemonic understanding of nation is not applicable for the universe of cultures, languages, and regional histories that form the Federal Republic of India today. Malsom Dongliana's interest is to write a cultural history of Mizoram and to describe the worldview of the Mizo. He raises the issue of the sources available for the pre-British history in the case of the Mizo as being oral, which according to him are valid sources. I will attempt to construct a discursive field, like I've mentioned, by depicting the life of the Mizo around the time when the first missionaries entered the Lushai Hills, as they were called at that time. This will be based on the connection or links established between the existing sources like oral tradition, the writings of the British colonial administrator or missionaries, and some archaeological and anthropological evidences. The objective for my larger study is to understand, first of all, how the present Mizo Christians' fate in life after death continues to be in conversation with concepts that goes back to pre-Christian times. And secondly, how that Mizo Christian concepts informs their life before death. Tracing and studying this process of translating heaven into beliefs and social practices of today requires in some parts some imaginative writing, because a lot of what needs to be addressed is no longer directly accessible. In this paper, I especially draw attention to the traditions and lore of the Mizo. Most of this has been transmitted through the writing of outsiders, and to my knowledge, no research has systematically looked into the oral resources among the Mizo. What the Christians Mizo of today considers to be their story and history, often considered as what everybody knows, like us in this meeting, is in the perspective of the study, the result of a cultural memory process based on interactions among themselves and with the British, be it a government officer, a missionary, or a merchant. From there emerged the understanding of what it means to be a Mizo and the space they are living in. We all know the map of the hill regions. These areas are inhabited by a number of varying tribal groups. The way of life of the tribes, the kinship of the languages, which points to an origin in the east of this area, invites us to recognize similarities and to name commonalities. I will agree with Patuau and Van Stengel, who I have quoted, who says that the peoples populating the hill region shared the following characteristic. They spoke related language, they spoke related languages. Their lifestyle were based on the specific forms of agriculture and hunting that the hills allowed. They had common cultural and religious principles, and they lived beyond the reach of states. The fact that there is a multitude of different languages, as well as the distinctive identities of the various tribes, is emphasized by the separation into federal state, tribal areas, and even by the separation by international borders like in the case of the Chin in Myanmar. In earlier maps, the region stretching from today's northeast to Myanmar was labeled as unknown or Burmese. Even where it was designated as Lushai Hills, it was uncharted territory. The British colonialists came on the western side from the plains of Assam and from the Chittagong Hills. On the other side of the mountain range in what is now Myanmar, the British colonizers also took control. There were efforts to cross the hills and thus intensify the traffic between these two regions. But these were opposed because of the mountainous terrain, which was not easy to access, and also the reputations of the tribals of the region who were regularly traveling down to the plains, raiding the tribal villages, the British tea gardens, was also not conducive for a swift occupation of the region. You are all probably familiar with this story and know this background very well. We usually tell the story as a series of events in which some were the cause for others, like in the raids being the region for the conquering of the hill region. I start by retelling the story in order to be able to reread it as a series of movements and clashes in a space which is perceived by the actors in the story in different perspective. This will enable us to interpret the process of translating heaven in a discursive field. On the one hand, as a result of cultural, social, and religious interactions, and on the other hand, as enabling practices which are becoming meaningful as they are engaging with this changing situation. One of the memory common to the Mizo, whose stories we're looking at, is that in time immemorial, they came out from a hole under a stone, under a rock rather, and started to walk on the surface of this earth. The Lord does not reveal precisely where they had been before this moment and where they came from. Clan by clan, the Paite, the Poi, and all the others also appeared. The last to come out were the Ralte, who were talking and chattering so much that Patian, God, decided there are now enough people on the surface and shut the hole under the stone. That means they just appeared and there is no mentioning of how humans were created or came into existence. Other creatures too reappeared, like the Mithun reappeared from the god seeds as is shown by their bellow. Ummu, pigs issued from the lake, wherefore they come to their food when they call Ri. The stone with the hole underneath it, which the different tribes claim as their common origin, is named Tsinlung and is assumed to be somewhere in the northeast direction. At one point in time, the clan started to move southwest, but there are no written sources about when and how long it took before they reached the region between the Kaladan and the Chinwin rivers. They passed Ridil, the lake through which they believed the souls of the dead enter, Mithikwa, village of the dead. This means that the route from the villages of the living to that of the dead under the lake was in a way a backward movement in the direction of the place their ancestors had passed during their onward journey to their present habitat, present-day Mizoram. Many of the studies I read for my research look at one element or the history of the Christian faith or a myth or the story of individuals, concentrating on point 3 and 4 of the common characteristics mentioned above. There is no foolproof methodology to reconstruct such a cultural memory of the period from the time immemorial to the time when the tribe started to interact with the British. The main sources for such a reconstruction seems to be the writings of the British, who relied on informants whose information they claim they have recorded and written down truthfully and correctly. Parry, one of the British administrators in the then Lushai Hills, wrote in 1927, "When I first came to the district, I found it extremely difficult in trying cases to ascertain the correct custom. The customs had never been recorded, and it was very difficult to get unbiased information. As far as can be ascertained, the customs now recorded are correct." That is what Parry believed. It is telling that Parry insinuated that before his written collection, there was no certainty as to the correct custom, and that only by codifying in writing, the customs were not biased anymore. What is required is a more thorough study in how far the cultural memory of the Mizo of today relies on the information recorded in the writing or books of the British, or whether it can be claimed as an independent source. What follows is the attempt of an imaginative description on the basis of various sources, which cannot be discussed in detail in this presentation. It is an attempt to reconstruct a discursive field in which elements and social practices become meaningful. The ancestors lived on agriculture and hunting and led a semi-nomadic life. They practiced zoom cultivation and grew rice and vegetables. Large areas of land were required so that they could slash and burn, use the land and then let it rest and rejuvenate. Their ideal village was on a hilltop with a vast space or land surrounding it. The site of the village was chosen in such a way that the next village was far enough so that there would be no need to fight for land or water or hunting grounds. They needed the jungle around for their June fields and as hunting ground, and to gather and collect what they needed for their daily lives, such as water, wood, and bamboo to construct their houses, thatch for the roofs, fruits and berries. And they also hunted wild animals for meat and their hides, such as the deer, wild boar, the wild mitten, birds, and if necessary, killed a tiger or a bear. They had domesticated dogs, the mitten, goats, chicken, and pigs, all of which were slaughtered for consumption. They produced zu, a rice beer required in large quantities for the various ceremonies and festivals. The layout of the villages shows that the center was defined by the chief's house, and how it was placed was defined by the geography of the hill. In front of the chief's house, there was a free space, an open space, which was used for the festivals and for meetings. And in front of his house, there would be a platform on which some of the housework, such as weaving, was done. Here, the chief would sit and hold his counsel and deal with the village matters. Another prominent center in the village was the Zolbuk, where the young man went to sleep at night. The Zolbuk was the space where the young men would sit and receive instructions about their ancestor, their place and role in the community, and the whole community's expectations of them. In short, all the knowledge that a young man needed to know in order to live his life according to the tradition handed down from his ancestors. Here, the young man learned not only how to fight in order to protect their village, but also learned the traditional songs and the folklore of their origin, their migration from one place to another till they reached their present place of settlement. They would learn about their ancestors and their genealogies and recall their deeds, which made them big heroes. They would learn the code of how things ought to be done and what ought not to be done, and what makes a Mizo a good person, following the code of Tlongwaitna. Parry tried to grasp the spirit of that code, writing, "A person who possesses Tlongwaitna must be courteous, considerate, unselfish, courageous, industrious. He must always be ready to help others, even at considerable inconvenience to himself. and must try to surpass others in doing his ordinary daily tasks efficiently. The village known as the Kwa was a space for daily life, for some of the daily work and of social relationships and of festivals. One of the points emerging from my short description is that there was no particular place for something that could be interpreted as religion. The village and the houses were the place where people were vulnerable to sicknesses, which were believed to be caused by the spirit. The gift or knowledge of the priest was essential to identify the cause of the sickness and to prescribe the cures for such illnesses, as well as find ways to avert other negative influences caused by the spirit. One common reason for sickness was attributed to witchcraft, which was greatly feared and sometimes led to violent reactions against those who were accused of practicing it. The area around the village was called Ram, and in order to survive here, hunters, warriors, and travelers needed to not only have the practical skills and knowledge on how to survive in the jungle, but also need to have the knowledge about the places inhabited by spirits so that they could avoid meeting them and not to be hit and harmed by them. From a spatial perspective, the borders of the area that villagers would consider as their territory that they could freely roam, where they could freely roam in, were not fully fixed. The borders were respected on the ground of the power of those holding it, not on titles on the land. Territorial supremacy was often a reason for fights and raids when villages would be raided, and the men that were not killed during the raid, along with the women and children, would be forcefully taken as slaves to the village of the victorious group. In such events, villages may disappear, and the borders of the territory would be redefined by the victorious chief. The description highlighted so far how social practices and roles defined the space and filled it with meaning. The social ideal of many Mizo clans was a person titled Tangtsua. The objective of achieving that status had to do with the search for control and power over one's enemies and the environment. There were two ways of achieving that status. One was connected to hunting in the jungle, Ramlam Tangtsua, outside of the village, and the second to the life in position of a household in the village, in Lam Tangtsua. To achieve the status outside the village, a man would need to kill enemies and several prescribed animals. Wild animals, such as elephant, a bear, a sambur, barking deer, wild boar, or a wild mitten, and also a snake and a hawk-like eagle. To achieve this status in the village, in Lam Tangtsua, a series of 5 sacrificial public feasts for the whole community had to be reorganized. This was rather costly, and only few rich persons could afford to do this. A large number of persons in the village would be involved in the preparation of this feast. The young girls and boys of the village who would help in preparing the zoo for the feast were rewarded with a certain portion of the drinks, and each feast lasted for about 3 or 4 days. And in the course of the festival, several pigs and mittens were slaughtered and prepared for the common consumption by the whole village. The two realms, the jungle and the village, were distinguished but interconnected. For the festivals, large amount of zoo, beer, and vegetables were needed, but the decisive element was the animal that had to be slaughtered and eaten. The Ramlam Tangtswa had to defeat enemies and wild animals on his own. The Inlam Tangtswa had to involve the community and to offer meat of two types of animals, the mithun and pigs. That is the domesticated version of the wild ones that were killed outside the village. For each and every animal that the successful Tangtswa killed outside the village, he had to perform a sacrifice in the village in order to conquer not only the animal but also its spirit. Only after such a sacrifice in the village would he fully dominate the spirit of the killed enemies and animals. He had to perform such a sacrifice in order to keep the spirits from haunting him in this lifetime and to be able to dominate them so that they would be his possessions, slave and servants in Pialral, where he was expected to go. All over Mizoram, one finds the so-called megalith structures with a high concentration in the Champai region. And Malsomdong Liana's observations help us to have a perspective about the stones. He says, within quote, the Mizos erected megalith monuments, usually at the entrance of the village Kotswa, and alongside roads and sometimes in the courtyard of the chief. Whenever a chief erected a stone monument at the entrance of the village, it was always accompanied by a stone platform, lungdo. The stone platforms of the chief were termed lal lungdo, stone platform of the chief. The megaliths usually faced the road and were erected alongside it at the entrance of the village, providing a comfortable resting place for the villagers with heavy loads coming from their Jum land or even the passerbys. Other than memorials to the dead, the erection of megaliths is also associated with feasts of merits of the chief and of the Tangtswa Pa, to commemorate individual prosperity and achievements, and also on the occasion of the establishment of a village. With individual prosperity and achievements, the figure of Tangtswa, both the Ramlam as the Inlam, as well as the Inlam, Lalming Lua and Sarkar in their survey of the megaliths in Champai region are able to connect some of the symbols on the stones to items used in the feasts performed by the Inlam Tangtswa, like gongs and copper bells. Others definitely can be connected to the deeds of the Ramlam Tangtswa, like killing enemies, which was depicted on the plates by heads or animals he killed, like an elephant, as the stone from the Kotswa Ropui. Let me just take you back to the one of the slide that I have, where you would see the stone plate from Kotswa Ropui, which depicts a Tangtswa with all the wild animals that that person had killed, such as the deer and wild animals. The deeds for which Ramlam Tangtswa is praised refer to the virtues of the true Mizo wearer, and those of the Inlam Tangtswa refers to the merit a person can obtain. If we change the perspective, the deeds of the first Tangtswa are connected to the space that a Mizo clan or tribe is claiming. The elephants stand for the plains, the plain area, the birds for the skies, other animals for the forest and for wider areas where the wild bovine and boar roamed and where the copra can be found. The practice of the Ramlam Tangtswa requires large areas in which the wild animals could roam. Killing the enemies, which were a constant threat to rob a village, steal supplies, and lead the people away to enslave them for work in the other place, was defending the village and guarding the space of the clan. According to Malsomdong Liana, the megaliths depicting the deeds of the Tangtswa were erected at the entrance to the village. There are also reports of the alleys of stones on which the deeds of such important heroes were recorded. This means that everyone who entered the village knew that such powerful men lived or had lived in this village, and what power was concentrated there in that village. Malsomdong Liana also reports that in other villages, there were slabs of rocks at the entrance on which certain symbols and figures were insert or engraved, which the people would understand, even if we today do not know anymore what they mean. The change of perspective helped to not limit the interpretation of a stone to be a memorial for a person, and then to attempt to identify the person. In some cases, such attempts led obviously to include the stone into the collective memory by associating it with a later story that made sense to the latter generations. The change of perspective leads to understand the multitudes of the erected stones and their placing as a network of signs which expresses something about the locality and its culture of remembrance and communicates that to those who visit the locality. In particular, those signs can be attributed to the Tangtsua, and the stones connect the locality to the shared understanding of space and of community across the different tribes and clans, which is reflected in the social practices associated with that figure. I have presented a picture of the life of the Mizo of today, which the Mizo of today considers as their ancestors. The description focuses on space and how it is formed and marked by social practices, culminating in the two aspects of the Tangtsua. It is based on the one hand on what everybody remembers or knows among the Mizo. This is a collective memory that unites the Mizo by speaking about what they share as a culture grounded in a time immemorial. Even this time immemorial has a spatial dimension by being linked back to a particular place from where the migration of the Mizo started. The second source for reconstructing the changes comprises of the writings of outsiders such as the British, colonial officers, missionaries, and academics. It is again not a reliable source because it is tainted and eclectic, even though most of the writers claim to have had a systematic approach. My presentation is an attempt to describe, characterize, or reconstruct from both sources the understanding of space, land, time, and a way of life of the ancestor. This has been done on the basis of their practice and style of living and less on their beliefs. It should create a reference space in which cultural concepts such as Tangtsua, even though considered as an accomplishment of an individual person, involves the social life of the whole village. During the time we're referring to, the term, the British, was also a metaphor for a system of colonial administration, a set of regulations and instruments that had proved effective in other regions and was now implemented in the hill states. It was a discourse on rule, land, culture, and race. In the frontier situation of the hill states, the British were, however, also individuals who were struggling and muddling their way through the new circumstances they were not used to. One such individual at that time, the 19th century, and in the region I'm looking at is Thomas Lewin. An interesting question regarding him would be to examine what, in his opinion, qualified him to do the work that he was doing. He records that there were critical questions by his superiors regarding his qualification because he was considered not to possess the judicial, procedural, and administrative knowledge that a functionary of the colonial administration was expected to know. On a different line, Lewin pointed out, I took my standing among them as a chief, paramount in the district, but subject to a yet greater white chief in Calcutta. Being part of the colonial setting, he adopted his style of administration to the way the tribals understood and exercised power. Lewin recounts how he impressed a chief of the Sindhas in the Chittagong Hills as he marched towards the east by claiming that he and the chief were from the same clan. The basis for this was the pronunciation of his name in the chief's dialect. The chief's name is given as Tuikam Tongloin, and Lewin pronounced his own name to him as Urbut Tongloin, whereas he usually rendered his name as Thomas H. Lewin. Lewin exclaimed regarding this encounter, "Sensation! We exchanged pipes in token of the bond between us." Later, after the successful British campaign into Lushai land, he reports, numbers of the condemned enemies, the Silas, came to visit me, for my name had become great in Lushai land. They called me father and named children Tangliana after me, it being, as they averred, a name of power and good fortune. In their eyes, he may have been a Ramlam Tangtua. My interpretation is that Lewin felt more comfortable with the way the clans were dealing with power than with administering the colonial system he was expected to install. A hint to that could be the remark by his superior on his lacking of judicial, procedural, and administrative qualifications, whereas he was in his place and time, undoubtedly successful in dealing with the clans. This is an important point because it demonstrates that Lewin, as a colonial administrator, negotiated power between the system he found in the Mizo clans and the colonial system he was taught to represent there and to impose on them. There is a revealing passage in which Lewin pondered about the future of the clans and asked himself whether the imposition of the new order will destroy their way of life and what that expected effect was expressing about the so-called civilized world. Though he adapted to the style of life and the exercise of power of the tribals he dealt with, Lewin's opinion on land usage was quite different from theirs. To him, the local population have no concept of making use of the land like the more advanced races he believed he belonged to. Lewin writes, the country where these villages were located had previously been uninhabited through fear of the marauding Lusais, and my idea had been to establish their good-stocked villages of courageous, stiff-necked people like the Gurkhas, who should serve as a buffer between the Mong Raja's territory and the independent Lushai tribes to the east. He shared the idea of the British of his time and mainly saw the possibility of exploiting the space to start and develop tea gardens, rubber plantations, and other agricultural activities as well as for hunting. The British defined the Hilkfor as marauding bandits, whereas the Mizo claimed the use of space and land and jungle according to the practice of life defined by the way of the life of their ancestors. The point I wish to highlight is that the cultural clash was not only on the diverging attitude to the right use of land, it was also a different reading of what power means. For the tribes, the power was invested in the person of the chief. It had to be exercised and proven to be strong, and it relied on the power relations that they were able to implement and maintain. They raised income by raiding others, by exercising the direct power of the stronger, not on the basis of being the owner of the space the other occupied. This power constantly had to be defended. Against this background, I will show in this passage how the concept of heaven was translated from a pre-Christian concept into a Mizo-Christian concept and retains some of its spatial characteristic. As we all know, I mean, like most of the Mizos here, Pielral and Mittikwa are the two places where the pre-Christian Mizo believed they would go to after death, depending on their achievements in life. Pielral was meant for those who had in their lifetime performed the act of Tangtwa. Mittikwa was the place where souls of ordinary people go to. There they would continue to work and toil forever, as they did during their lifetime, without really being able to enjoy the fruits of their work. It was not a place they were looking forward to spend their life after death. Mittikwa was believed to be a place of shadows, where everything that exists, including water and food, were in shadowy forms. So those who reside in Mittikwa could never satisfy their hunger or quench their thirst. This is to say that a social distinction in the community was translated into different places in space. Shakespeare reproduced in his book, The Lusae Cookie Clans of 1912, a map drawn by an indigenous informant, presumably a non-Christian Mizo, how to find the way from a Mizo village to these two places. He added to his map the location of a Christian village and the place where the Christians would go to after death. He notes that the path to this Christian heaven is guarded by Iswa, and that the paths to the two mentioned Mizo places were guarded by Satan. This means that roughly 20 years after the first missionaries started to reflect on how to communicate the Christian truth of heaven to the Mizo, Jesus and Satan were placed in the space in relation to the places where Mizo believed they would go after death. A concept which in the Christian tradition is a temporal one became part of the spatial concept of the pre-Christian clans. Shakespeare's comment on the insertion of the figures Satan and Jesus is itself a good example of the translation process of heaven I intend to study. He comments that the map is showing a broad spirit of tolerance in the author, who, without abandoning the faith of his forefathers, is ready to admit the truth of Christianity and its suitability to those who profess it. Moreover, the informant sees no difficulty in providing in the unknown lands beyond a grave a special country for each race, just as there is in the world he knows of and he is familiar with. This is an interpretation based on Shakespeare and his contemporaries' worldview that there is a conflict of truth which would urge a convert from the faith of the forefathers to the Christian faith to decide for one side and declare the other as an error. It seems to me to be more accurate to say that as a representation of space and with the embedded meanings the map displays an understanding that there are different places in the world, and depending in which village you live in your life, you will walk after death to one of the possible places after you die. Just like there are the spaces held by other tribes or clans, there are different places for Mizo and for Mizo Christians, and the path to their dwelling place after death needs to be guarded. It is guarded by the strongest power the Mizo Christian knew, which is Jesus. This concept of the land being the place for the wild that needed to be dominated and conquered, and of the spirits that needed to be warded off, and also to be turned into servant spirits, is connected to the spatial location of the route to Pielral and the place itself. Even though it is to be attained after death, a time or concept, it is a spatial concept that is connected to the physical land in a particular geographical location. This is demonstrated by the fact that the informant did not put Pielral on his map, but its assumed location, reveal. The map drawn by the Mizo informant shows that from the Mizo Kwa or the village, 7 roads from all the world of the Mizo leads to one place. Such a place can be identified on the map of the Tampai region. In Vangtia, a place with 171 stone plates and megaliths, like the one I have shown to you, 7 roads meet, of which one leads to Reveal, the lake under which the dead enters the realm of Pialral and Mythiqua. So let me just show you again the seven roads. The other slide where you have this. You have this, which is drawn by the Mizo informants of Shakespeare. And then you have this, the 7 roads that meets, and one of them leads to Reveal. And there resides a figure called Pupola, the guardian of the access to the village of the dead and to Pialral. The Ramlama Thangtswa is on his journey to Pialral, imagined to be sitting on the head of the deer he killed, holding its horn. The snake that he had killed would wind itself around him, and the hawk he shot down flies above his head like a shadow, so that Pupola would not be able to see him and could not shoot his pellets at him. All this imagination or beliefs point to the fact that the Mizo had a map of their own world, which included knowledge about the physical space, the distances, the hills, the rivers, and the roads to travel across. This spatial concept was further enhanced by the history and experience of their migration, which they connected to certain places that became the docking point for some folklore. It also had a kind of spiritual dimension in the sense of a concept of nature that was alive and living and driven by the spirits of the plants and the animals and the spirits that were dwelling around them. It is ultimately a concept of the run of life from birth through all the hardships of life in the natural physical world, and the constant necessity to ward off the influence of the spirits until eventually the soul of the deceased would find its way to either Mythiqua, the village of the dead, or to Pialral. Before it enters, the soul would drink the water that would make it forget its past life, so that it would not want to return to its former life and haunt the living. For my purpose and research, it is important to note that Mizo Christianity is not the implementation of what the white missionaries preach. It is also the result of negotiations and adaptations in which the Mizo had agency, as the examples I had quoted proved. They, as I have elsewhere highlighted, have interpreted and adopted the Christian faith from within their own tradition, their own worldview, and their way of life in their present life. That means that we're able to find traces of such adaptations and reinterpretations of pre-Christian forms in the practice of their faith. The Mizo Christians continued practices in celebrating important events like Christmas or wedding with the slaughtering of a Gael or Mithun, the large bovine that played an important role in their pre-Christian rituals. When the impositions of the British administration in the Northeast, the traditional world was turned upside down. Welsh missionaries came in 1889 and 1894 with the gospel, filling in the vacuum and cultural void, which was created by this alien rule. Protestant Christianity itself was gradually being modified as a result of its insertion into a Mizo worldview. The form of Christianity that had resulted in Mizoram with its emphasis on the triumph of Jesus, bringing with its spiritual power and liberation to believers, cut across all denominations. The efforts of Christian missionaries to develop a lingua franca and promote education among the inhabitants contributed to their acquiring support from the populace. They gained converts to the faith, and in combination with other factors, Christianity began to spread among the people. Starting with modest number, churches began to record a phenomenal growth in members. From our point of view, the crucial fact was that Christianity was spreading throughout the region. On the whole, missionaries contributed to the development of a common language and a statewide religious faith. These developments have contributed to the integration of the Mizo society. In another paper that I had written about how this common language, the Lusei language, which became the lingua franca of the Mizo, because the missionaries were using that and had also developed a script for that, became an integrating force of the Mizo society and in their understanding of citizenship. But that is just something that we will not deal with in this presentation. The Mizo learned from the missionaries a kind of customized, localized gospel, which proved to be very successful. Many of the old beliefs were now reinterpreted by them in the light of the gospel, so that the Mizo could better understand its messages. For instance, because Mizo, like many non-Western peoples, did not have any equivalent in their indigenous system of the Christian concept of sin, they struggled to understand this message of Jesus Christ as one who atoned for sin. They were instead better able to understand the concept of a savior conquering the powers of darkness and death and liberating them of this. Though the Mizo did not have the concept of a chief evil spirit, Satan was translated as Ramhuailalpa, which literally means Lord or Chief of the evil spirit. In this regard, the missionaries reported that the Mizos were fond of hearing that Jesus has conquered the devil and death, and often people come to us to tell them about Jesus. This is the missionaries' report. Not only was Jesus presented as the conqueror and liberator from the devil and the demons, but also as the one who guarantees Pialral. The missionaries taught that all those who believe in Jesus Christ were assured of going to Pialral after death, the story of the love of God, Jesus' death on the cross as a sacrifice to save and redeem humans, and Jesus' resurrection as a victory over that itself was presented as an answer to the two most significant questions for the Mizos, namely, how can I be liberated from the power of the evil spirits or forces around me? And the second question, how can I attain the passage to Pialral? Pialral is considered to be a destination which was elusive for most of the Mizos, and this became democratized, and access to it was opened for all those who embraced Christianity and had faith in the liberating work of Pathian through the sacrificial act on the cross and the resurrection. This resulted in all the different Mizo tribes who had their own separate Sakwa to accept Christianity as their religion, thus creating a union of different tribes under Christian Sakwa, and a shift in their consciousness resulting in collectively assuming a common or shared identity. This operated at the beginning within the indigenous communities. Christianity and the new understanding of heavenly citizenship with Christ as the Lord disrupted and questioned the religious and social and political unity of the Mizo tribes. Like the early Christians in Rome, the first new Mizo converts were separated from the traditional social life and its activities. In some villages, they were persecuted by the Mizo chiefs. The missionaries' prohibition of Christians from participating in social activities of the village, such as in festivals, drinking any kind of rice beer, singing the traditional Mizo songs and its tune, taking part in traditional dances and participating in the sacrifices, disrupted this close-knit communitarian life. When a Christian abstained from any of the above activities related to the community life, he or she became alienated from the rest of the community. On the other hand, the role of Christianity is not so clear-cut as to simply say that the introduction of Christianity brought about conflict and alienation of the Mizo Christians from the rest of the community, because within a span of 20 years, almost all the Mizo became Christians and Mizoram became a predominantly Christian state. This changed the dynamics of the relationship between the early converts and the rest of the community that was prevalent when Christianity was first introduced into Mizoram. My interest in this paper was to delineate some of the epistemological preconditions forming a field in which eventually something like a Mizo identity of today emerged. Reconstructing this process is a contribution to the writing of history in the Northeast, especially in Mizoram. My main interest is to understand how the present Mizo Christians' fate in life after death continues to be in conversation with concepts that goes back to pre-Christian times, and how that Mizo-Christian concepts inform their life before death. In order to do so, I have been retelling the story of the Mizo. I reread it as a series of movement and clashes in a space which is perceived by the actors in the story in different perspectives. My description focused on space and how it is formed and marked by social practices culminating in the two aspects of the Thangswa. It is based on the one hand on what everybody remembers or every Mizo knows. This is a collective memory that unites the Mizo by speaking about what they share as a culture grounded in a time immemorial. Even the time immemorial has a spatial dimension by linking it back to a particular place where the Mizo started their long migration before they eventually settled in the hilly region that today is called Mizoram. With such an approach, it becomes more visible that what we observe today as Mizo Christianity has been affected by the shift from the oral tradition to written communication and went through a continuous process of re-evaluation in the light of cultural and social negotiations among the Mizo and with the British, be it colonizers, missionaries, or merchants. In these processes, the Mizos, as I showed, were actors, not objects. Placing the translation of the lore connected to Mythiqua and Pialral in the mapping of the space as I did, I showed or attempted to show how the concept of heaven was transformed from a spatial concept to a temporal world. That transition was accompanied by using the Mizo concept of direct and greater power as an interpretative approach to Jesus, who ensured the passage to heaven. I hope that I was being able to offer you a rereading of what everybody knows or everyone knows in Mizoram and add new perspective about the changes that happened in Mizoram between the late 19th century and today by linking the different aspects or elements that I have been highlighting in my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Marina. That was very, very comprehensive presentation, and it is well based on the in-depth study, very in-depth research studies. So it's really, really a very enlightening and thought-provoking lectures. We are so happy to be witnessing that presentations, and there are some participants who are asking for the slides presentations. I don't know whether they can contact you directly through your emails as such, because many of them are interested. I have been getting an inbox in my own private WhatsApp message also. So many people are interested in that. I don't know whether it's up to you to decide whether you can share the slide or not. So,
yeah, I could share the slide later on, because while I was presenting, I saw that there were some mistakes. So I would correct the typos and then.
Sure, no problem, no problem. We can keep in touch. And those participants, that's a really great news that and prominent experts is willing to share her slides from an in-depth study. So thank you very much. There are some questions, even though we have taken quite a long time for this webinar. There are some questions, so I would like to request our coordinator, one of the coordinator, Zara, to take up the question hour and ask the resource person the questions which they will be answering. Okay, Zara, kan question le answer kan sang se. So anin pi marinai le pi mal so mi Mizo trong a chan mo sap trong kha it's okay whether it's a answer in Mizo or English mo kha kanang mani thu ni se question hun kha zara kan han mang lok se hun kan man rei lo jok nan.
Ole kan tinghal zung nga we have so many questions, so but because of time limitation we are going to ask 2 questions each to our speakers, and 10 katichu question 10 katichu kan relevant do tuklo do kan ngayang chi khom poka khang khachu ke ma hian kalo chang poka a compilation of Mizo poetry tiang chi te kha oma khang kha ke ma sai ta tang khan kan thei dan dan kan no chang to bokani de kha kan soi ma salok duwa. And we are going to ask the first question to Pimal Somi. Pimal Somi Jacob lo chana tan khan kan ki ma salok nga zo na hi Mizo trong ani ya Mizo trong hi kan chiar mai nga milong ai thak sakta sela Mizo la lui tam tak chai hla chong chen zai le mi mal ming choi hla te kha chop le chila phua a phua tuin a khil midangin an lo sak pui ven in an soi thina chuti ani chuan midang te khan a hla kha an khet hiamin an tui pui thei ti na ania tun lai hun atang chuan khang la lui te kha kan khet thiam lo atam em to maya khang la lui phua na trong kam te kha a hun lai trong tua leng ani ve thei mai ngem ngai ngai dan han ron ti ni ngai dan a chan thei ni ome Pimal Somi
yeah ri chu ni me nga kan shet tia lo an nya a chu ka share ga ni a chu kha chu om sa chu mi zai dia po ani chin khamo chuan an sa the nga chu ani phot maya asa ka tin nya an tui pui nga la shet yang hal war ni om tak chunya tin mak ka ti le pakha chu hei pi mo ki la teng ti kan ne hi ala chuang sa mang reng viao mi heng ti kan ne dan hi sia chu wangin an tui pui tlang phak mai ngal tin ne ya karin da be tho chu bo chu
ole hello men, now we are going to the next question, and this is for Pimal Somi zot na tho ani ya ikan Pimal salo lo Pimal Somi ka pati kan zot don che dang po ma se kan zot man to lo kan ngai me nga hun ki kal de ole to English in ani thunga hei chu kan share nga when we say Mizo poetry or Mizo poems, we do not actually have a certain margin between songs and poems. Do you think it is necessary to have a margin, Tikani?
Yeah, actually some of our songs are quite, you can call it poetry in the sense of its quality, its literary quality, but margin, I think we should have margin now in the sense some poems are composed for singing and some are composed for not singing. So I think some keeping for the sake of study, actually, yeah, like we said, some songs make good poetry, but for the sake of study, I think we should keep some sort of a margin now. Since we already have both types, I think it's good to keep margin. And like when there's you said there's a poetry writing competition, for example, I think that is my personal opinion, of course, you should be taking only those that are not meant for singing. That's how I think. I'm sure not everybody is going to agree, but that is my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am. And so now we are going to the other questions, and this is for Madam Marina. And the question is, are we Mizo to be blamed for our history not being reelected as great as desired to be? Tikania, are we Mizo to be blamed for our history not being reelected as great as we desire it to be?
I think this question do not have one perfect answer which would fit all questions, because it has several layers and aspect to it. I would say yes and no. Yes, in the sense because we are not too proactive in doing that work. And also I would say no, because in the sense that because of this discourse where it was mostly colonial. I remember that in the beginning, Dr. Ralte said, we're not going to go into post-colonial studies and post-colonial discourse. But if you know how the post-colonial discourse works, then you would be able to understand how the Mizo's understanding and the Mizo history has been relegated, behind. And then the colonial narrative come to the fore when the Mizo history is being talked about or being promoted in that sense. So it's not a very easy answer, and yes, it's something that we still need to develop. And I think the most important thing is what the way I have repeatedly mentioned in my presentation. We often say everybody knows that, right? So everybody knows, but we don't know how everybody come to know that. So we don't try to look behind what everybody knows. How did everybody come to know about it? What was it exactly that everybody knows? The perspective behind that. So these are things that we need to really look into and look at it in a more systematic academic way. And also the question of immemorial time. When did it happen? Since when? We just said, okay, from long time ago or since immemorial. So this is something that we need to problematize and really look into in order to have a more systematic and precise understanding of our own history, which is more true. In the sense, you cannot have the truth, but which is more true and akin to Mizo's own worldview and history.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to the next question, and this is the last question for Q&As. And the question is, do you think it is easy for us to understand the Christian concept of heaven with our concept of PLRAL? It is easy for us to understand the Christian concept of heaven with our concept of PLRAL, Dr. Marina.
I would not say that it is. I'm not saying that the concept of PLRAL of the pre-Mizo Christians has been, as a whole, being transferred into the Mizo Christian understanding of heaven of today. I would say that there is an adaptation to it, an adaptation to our ancestors' understanding of what PLRAL was all about. I had listed the questions of what was the question that they were asking. What will happen to me in after I die? What would happen? Where would I go? And PLRAL at that time was not accessible. It was accessible only to the Tangtua and to the wives. So with the Christian message of heaven, it was democratized. So it suddenly became possible for everybody, man and women, ordinary man and women, who were believing in Christ, to be able to attain that place of rest, attain where they would no longer toil. I think that was the reason as to why the concept of life after death is connected to the adoption of the pre-Mizo beliefs and translated into the Christians' understanding of heaven. I think that's. I mean, it's quite complicated. It's not a straight translation or a straight adoption or transposition of the pre-Christian faith into a Christian faith of today, because there are several layers and aspects which need to be taken care and which need to be looked into. Yes, and then you would say that even in many of the Mizo Christian hymns and songs, you have the word PLRAL which is being used, because I think this comes from a collective memory of our own, what would I say, collective history as we remember it.
Yeah, that's very useful, I think, and very interesting answer. So it is very fortunate to have an expert like our expert today here. And the kan zona to kan zot zota zona dang poilo omna ai mase kun tang apply to de vain kan zot sun som to lo mai nga ka kan ti de wa lo mom khop mai ka zona le chana kun po thatakin kan mang pe ngai nom khop maya Dr. Marina paper te ka chui thu khoping de ge pon lo thu po kan sei ve lo kan chu ngai nom ka ti khop mai or the kan mi su ti the na hun ka pele tanga ani kan ron sun som la se khange.
Thank you, Zara. Lom zona te po kha Chancellor lo kan ne a lom khop mai tin hi du chuan an email te kha heta organizers te pon kan ne in contact with he tur le zona enga mai zo du ni pon. You can always ask for the emails. The organizers, the university organizer kept their emails with them, so you can take it and ask more questions if you want. So coming to the last part, it is the to propose the vote of thanks. Dr. Zoramdin Thara was supposed to give the vote of thanks, but right now he just called up and said that he has some issue with his connection, so I could not find him. Ramdin akala aomem oron lutem alut lawani chuan tikan ke man heta tangin ka tizui mayanga har satla technical problem ani ta ka bangin Dr. Zoramdin Thara poile mai associate professor in the Department of Mizo ka vote of thanks. So during continue. Anyway, I will just propose the vote of thanks from here as the moderator. So today I would once again like to thank the resource persons who are very much experts in their field. So one is from poetry, and we have Dr. Marina, who is in the talking about the culture and history relating from the pre-Christian era to the post-Christian era, the beliefs and practices relating the time and space and all those things. So thank you once again to our speakers today for your presentations, your hard-earned presentations, which we have got it freely. Thank you once again. And also I would like to thank our Vice Chancellor, sir, even though he has left us. I think he is no longer with us. Thank you very much, sir, for your raising the function. I think Puramdina has come back. Is it? He has left again. Okay, anyway, I will continue. So thank you all the participants who are here today. Thank you very much for your cooperations, especially those participants who does not understand Mizo. You are bearing with us. I know many of you are still here, and you are very much concerned about the culture and history and all those Mizo contexts. We are so much grateful to you. So I would like to thank you especially, and all the participants, the students and our colleagues from the university, our senior professors are with us here today. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for your participation. And also I would like to thank Suraj and his team from the computer center who are taking all the burdens and technical issues for handling everything for the smooth running of this program. I want to thank them especially for that too. And also thank you, our head of department, who is the chief coordinator of this program, Professor Ariel Tanmoya. He is for those persons who do not know, he is the Padma Shri awardee in literature. He is a senior professor in the department and head. We have two Padma Shri awardee in the department of Mizo. So I would like to highlight that as well. So thank you very much, sir, for your keynote address. So with that, I think I will wind up this program. Thank you, everyone. For other things, you will get it in your email regarding the feedback and the certificates. I think you can contact that through emails. Okay. Thank you, everyone. With that, we have conclude the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Marina.
Thank
and
you.
Dr.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Good night. It's
Bye
night for me.
Good night, Pishati, and good day,
Good night,
Marina.
Ruth. Yeah. Anh lòm lướt tục kho cái mình bùa.
Anh lòm lướt tục kìa.
Anh lòm lướt tục kìa. Miss, hello.
Cá vẹt u.
Ra sa kan mo. Cái ao dri đó na nang ma khan du le. Ho sa ka da ti ati che mo nang ma khan lok close mai don mi.
Okay, I will